The room shimmered with crystal light and whispered power. Gold chandeliers reflected off champagne glasses, laughter floating like perfume. And then, the silence that only comes before something ugly. A pale hand lifted a wine glass full to the brim. Scarlet against silk. Then came the voice, not calm but cutting. "You really thought this table was open seating?" Heads turned. The words weren't shouted, but they landed heavy enough to stop the music. At the center of it all sat Danielle Brooks, black mid-40s, elegance wrapped in restraint. Her black suit outshone half the gowns in the room, but not to everyone.
How did you pull it off?
Across from her stood Charlotte Pierce, 39, socialite, sister to tech billionaire Grant Pierce, the man Danielle was finalizing a $2.4 billion renewable energy merger with tonight. A deal months in the making, a partnership meant to reshape two industries, and yet here they were, paused over something smaller, pettier, race, ego, power. Charlotte smiled. That kind of smile people wear when they're sure they won't face consequences. She tipped the glass. Red wine poured down Danielle's blazer. Slow, deliberate, soaking into the fabric like insult turned liquid. A gasp rippled through the gala hall. Cameras flashed, not for the decor, but for the damage. "Oh," Charlotte said softly, feigning surprise. "I thought you were staff." Someone laughed, one of those nervous, complicit laughs that fill expensive rooms when no one wants to be next. Danielle didn't move. She didn't flinch. She blinked once, slow, deliberate, as the wine ran down her sleeve and onto the marble. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the static. "You mistook silence for service. That's your first mistake," the host froze. Grant Pierce himself, the billionaire, shifted uncomfortably at the main table, eyes darting between his sister and the woman who, at that moment, still technically held half his future in her hands. A waiter rushed forward with napkins, but Danielle stopped him with a small gesture. Palm down. The room didn't breathe. She stood slowly. Each second she rose, the air thickened. "This is what arrogance looks like when it wears diamonds," she said, not loud but clear. "Before you embarrass yourself further, ask your brother who you just poured wine on," the room murmured. Someone whispered, "Isn't she the investor?" Another, "No, she's part of the Pierce team, right?" Before Grant could speak, Danielle turned toward the camera lights glinting from a far table. A live stream in progress, broadcasting the gala to hundreds of guests in other rooms. She adjusted her blazer, stained but steady. "Before we continue," she said, her tone measured, her gaze calm, "where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now I'm back to Danielle Brooks. Her name landed like a gavel. The same name printed across the top of the merger paper sitting just 10 feet away. Brooks Energy Group, the company that built the cleantech infrastructure Grant's empire depended on. And for the first time that night, it wasn't the chandeliers or champagne that glowed. It was the realization spreading across every table. The woman covered in wine wasn't a guest out of place. She was the reason they were all here. The camera stayed on her face, unbothered, unbroken. And behind her, Charlotte's glass slipped slightly, trembling. Not from guilt, from recognition. The band tried to restart. A nervous piano note stumbled, then stopped again. No one clapped. No one spoke. Charlotte Pierce, still holding the empty glass, forced a laugh. "Relax, everyone. It was an accident." But her voice cracked on the word accident. It wasn't convincing. Not to anyone who'd seen her wrist twist. Grant Pierce stood now, tall, embarrassed, calculating. "Charlotte, that's enough." He spoke like a man trying to protect a name, not a woman. Danielle turned slightly toward him, her blazer still stained, her composure unshaken. "Enough was 5 seconds ago," she said quietly. Another ELNB, sharp as glass. Cameras shifted, discreet but present. A reporter near the bar whispered into her mic, "We're live on Channel 7. The air around them thickened. Wealth and fear always smelled the same, like perfume and denial. One server whispered to another, "That's her, right? Brooks Energy?" The other nodded. "Yeah, the CEO." Grant ran a hand through his hair. "Danielle, please, let's move to the lounge. We can talk privately." "Privately?" she asked, eyes calm. "You mean quietly?" The kind of quietly that keeps power comfortable. She didn't move. Instead, she looked around the room. The photographers, the silent investors, the staff frozen mid-motion. You all just watched a woman humiliate another, in public because she assumed position equals permission. Her voice didn't rise, but every syllable felt amplified through the chandeliers. Charlotte scoffed, trying to laugh again. Oh, come on, don't make this about race or gender. I didn't know who you were. Danielle's eyes didn't flinch. You didn't need to. That's the problem. The waiter who'd offered the napkins earlier was still standing near the table, uncertain. He whispered, should I clean it? Danielle shook her head. No, leave it. Let them look at what arrogance costs. Charlotte turned red. You're being dramatic. No, Danielle replied. I'm being deliberate. The murmurs grew louder. Someone was already uploading clips. A headline was writing itself before dessert. Grant stepped closer, voice lowered. Danielle, my sister made a mistake. Please don't turn this into a... She cut him off without raising her tone. Into what? A mirror? The band had stopped pretending to play. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Danielle reached into her clutch, no trembling hands, no wasted motion. She tapped a single contact on her phone. The screen lit up. Carla, exec, liaison. Carla, she said softly. Confirmed timestamp 8:46 p.m. at the Pierce Foundation Gala. Carla's voice came through the tiny speaker, crisp and immediate. Confirmed. And yes, we're already receiving footage from multiple guests. Do you want me to initiate protocol? Yes, Danielle said. Activate contract review sequence on the Pierce file. Charlotte blinked. What are you doing? Exactly what you taught me, Danielle answered. Public accountability. Grant's voice dropped lower, almost pleading now. Danielle, please, not here. She looked at him one last time. Grant, this started here. It ends here. And with that, she turned back toward the crowd, toward every phone, every camera, every witness. 7 minutes, she said. That's all it takes to destroy a partnership built on ignorance. The last note of the sentence lingered, echoing through the hall like a quiet sentence being passed. Charlotte's hand trembled. Grant's jaw tightened. And somewhere in the distance, the first notification buzzed. Pierce Brooks deal, internal review triggered. The gala wasn't an event anymore. It was evidence. The buzz of phones spread like wildfire. People weren't whispering anymore, and they were recording. Screens glowed across the ballroom, tiny blue lights blinking like judgment. Charlotte Pierce's face stiffened. Her smile, that perfect socialite mask, began to crack under the glare of her own reflection. She looked around for sympathy, found only silence. At the back of the room, a young event coordinator froze mid-step. Naomi Ellis, 26, junior staff. She'd been assigned to oversee the guest list, seating charts, and press credentials. She knew every name in that room, except one that had been moved earlier that day. Seat 12A, reserved. Brooks Energy Group. She'd watched Charlotte override it and write, open. Naomi's throat tightened. She checked her tablet again, the digital log glowing like proof. Danielle was still standing, calm, unshaken. The wine stain on her blazer had dried into a dark mark that looked less like a mistake and more like armor. Carla, she said quietly into her phone, confirm public record of incident log 14A. Already documented, ma'am, Carla replied. Footage from 4 verified guests and 2 journalists. Danielle nodded. Good, leave the file open. Let them see transparency for once. Grant rubbed his forehead, pacing now. Charlotte hissed under her breath. You're making a spectacle. Danielle turned toward her. No, Charlotte. You made one. I'm just giving it an audience, the crowd murmured. One older man near the bar, an investor maybe, muttered. She's right. Another whispered. That was the Pierce sister, wasn't it? This is bad. Naomi's hands shook. She stepped forward. Ms. Brooks, she said, voice trembling but clear. Danielle turned, soft but firm. Yes? Your seat, it was assigned. I watched Ms. Pierce change it this morning. She said it was open seating. The entire hall stilled, Charlotte's lips parted. That's a lie. Naomi's chin lifted a little. No, ma'am. It's in the system log. She turned the tablet toward the nearest table, the digital record glowing on screen. A timestamp, a name. Edit by Charlotte Pierce, 2:04 p.m. Gasps broke the room like thunder. Danielle didn't smile. She didn't need to. ELNB number 1 landed clean. The truth always finds a witness. Sometimes she's been standing in the corner the whole time. Charlotte's mask shattered completely. Her hand trembled. Her diamond bracelet clinked against the empty glass she still held. You're going to regret this. Danielle's gaze sharpened. Cool. Unwavering. I don't regret clarity. Grant tried again. Danielle, please. Don't escalate. She faced him with that same unbreakable calm. This is escalation, Grant. The kind that doesn't need shouting or security, just truth. Naomi swallowed hard, still holding up the tablet like a shield of light. Her voice steadied. The footage from the live stream is syncing. People are already posting. Carla's voice returned through Danielle's phone. Confirmed. Pierce Gala trending within 3 minutes. 30,000 views and counting. Grant's shoulders slumped. He understood what that meant. Not a scandal, but a collapse. Charlotte muttered, "You wouldn't dare pull the deal over this." Danielle's tone dropped low, every syllable deliberate. Conby number 2. Dignity isn't negotiable. The deal was. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Somewhere near the back, applause started. Soft, then another. Within seconds, half the room was clapping. Not for drama. For truth. Naomi lowered her tablet, tears in her eyes, not from fear but release. Danielle met her gaze across the room and nodded once. You spoke when it mattered, she said softly. That's how change begins. ELNB number 3. Final note of this part. Justice doesn't start with power. It starts with someone finally saying, I saw what happened. The cameras captured that moment. The woman in black, steady and calm, standing in a storm she didn't start but refused to step out of. And across the room, Grant Pierce realized something colder than loss. He wasn't watching a meltdown. He was watching a reckoning. The applause didn't die down, it spread. Uneven, hesitant at first, then steady, defiant. What began as disbelief was now direction. Charlotte Pierce stood frozen in the center of it all, her skin pale under the chandeliers, eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for a door that no longer existed. The room had turned, not violently but decisively. Grant tried to speak over the noise. Please, everyone, this is a misunderstanding. But the crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. They were watching her. Danielle Brooks didn't move. She waited until the clapping thinned, until silence returned, not as surrender, but as focus. 7 minutes ago, she said, voice calm and deliberate. I was your guest. Now I am your lesson. The sentence hung like a verdict. ELNB Marie 1, cold and absolute. Naomi, still near the side stage, lowered her tablet slowly, eyes locked on Danielle. She'd seen people with power before, loud, boastful, restless. This wasn't that. This was gravity. Charlotte's mouth twitched, desperate for control. You think this makes you powerful? You embarrassed yourself over a spill. Danielle stepped forward, each heel clicked deliberate. No, you embarrassed your brother's empire over an assumption. Grant clenched his jaw, tone slipping from polished to panicked. Danielle, you can't just threaten a merger on emotion. Her eyes shifted to him, cool and unwavering. Emotion? Grant, this is documentation. She gestured lightly toward Naomi's tablet, still glowing in the corner. And documentation builds courtrooms, not tantrums. Carla's voice chimed again softly from her phone. Ma'am, contract review sequence is halfway complete. Legal is synced and waiting on your verbal trigger. Danielle nodded, still without looking down. Hold for signal. The words verbal trigger alone sent murmurs through the front tables. Attorneys, PR heads, donors. They knew what it meant. She wasn't bluffing. ELNB number 2. She turned to Charlotte. You spilled wine on me, but I hold the pen that writes your contracts. One cleans up easily, the other doesn't. A collective inhale swept the room. Someone whispered, she's really going to do it. Charlotte tried to laugh it off, shaking her head. You're overreacting. My brother will fix this. Danielle's reply was almost kind. You're right about one thing, and your brother will fix this. Just not the way you think. She turned slightly toward the press table. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, for transparency's sake, every interaction related to this partnership will be reviewed publicly through Brooks Energy's ethics board. Including this one. Gasps rippled again, not from shock but from realization. The fallout had already begun. Naomi whispered almost to herself. She's rewriting the room. Grant stepped forward, desperation cracking through his composure. Danielle, please. You're blowing up months of work. No, Grant, she said, steady. I'm protecting decades of progress. ELNB, Birth 3. You can rebuild deals. You can't rebuild dignity. The reporters caught every word. The flash of phones painted her in white light, the kind reserved for history, not gossip. Charlotte set her glass down with a trembling hand. The sound, soft, accidental, echoed through the marble hall like a full stop. She tried to speak, but her voice broke halfway through the sentence. I didn't mean, you meant every drop, Danielle said quietly. And every drop has consequence. Grant looked toward the doors as if escape was still possible. But it wasn't, because this wasn't a scene anymore, and it was a statement. And the woman standing at its center wasn't a victim. She was the standard. The marble floor caught her reflection, still, poised, deliberate. Everything about Danielle Brooks said control, not chaos. Carla's voice returned through the phone, low but steady. Ma'am, legal counsel is on standby. Do you want to proceed with termination clause review? Yes, Danielle replied. Initiate the Pierce clause under Ethics Protocol 7A. Confirmed, Charlotte's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Grant answered before Danielle could. His voice was tight, uneasy. It means she's invoking the conflict of interest provision. She's cutting us off. Phones buzzed across tables. People were texting now, screenshots flying faster than the music ever had. Every whisper carried a headline. Pierce contract at risk. Brooks Energy CEO responds to public incident. Charlotte took a step forward, voice shaking. You can't just end a $2 billion deal over feelings. Danielle's eyes flicked toward her, calm, surgical. I don't operate on feelings. I operate on standards. ELNB number 1. Clean, cold, unforgettable. Naomi, still standing near the screen, watched as lines of legal text began populating the shared contract feed on her tablet. Clause 7A, Ethical Breach Review. Clause 9B, Public Trust Violation. One by one, they lit up in gold. The system was live. Grant tried again, voice cracking under pressure. Danielle, there are other ways to resolve this. Let us issue a statement, pay restitution. You can't pay your way out of integrity, Grant. She stepped closer, her tone still soft but lethal. Money only buys silence. I don't sell that product. Charlotte looked around wildly, for support, for rescue, for denial, but the eyes that met hers were no longer loyal. They were calculating. Please, she whispered, you don't have to do this. Danielle tilted her head slightly. You're right. I don't have to, but I will. Carla's voice echoed again, crisp and clear through the tiny speaker. All departments confirm sync. Would you like to announce formal suspension? Danielle turned her phone outward, speaker on, camera lights still rolling. Proceed. The words dropped into the air like a final gavel. Carla continued, audible to everyone. Effective immediately, the Pierce-Brooks Renewable Partnership is suspended pending ethical audit. All joint access privileges revoked. Grant froze. Charlotte's mouth fell open. Every investor in the room stared, some in disbelief, some in awe. ELNB number 2. That's not a threat, Danielle said. That's a system. And I built it to protect people from nights exactly like this. The crowd was silent, but the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with consequence. Naomi whispered to herself. She just killed $1 billion deal with a sentence. Danielle turned to the nearest camera. Not for performance, not for permanence. Accountability isn't revenge, she said. It's repair. Grant exhaled slowly, defeat mixing with regret. You'll regret this, he murmured. She met his eyes with a calm steadiness that made him look smaller. No, Grant, you will. When you realize that what you built was never partnership, it was permission. ELNB number 3. The final cut of this part. Her tone didn't rise. It deepened. And permission expires the moment respect does. The lights of the gala suddenly felt harsher. Flashes flickered, catching Charlotte's still-stained hand, the wine trail on the marble, the woman standing above it all. Carla's voice one last time. Protocol complete. Suspension confirmed. Danielle closed the phone softly, like closing a chapter. The band hadn't played a note in minutes, and yet the room had never been louder, not with sound, but with realization. Justice had become digital, and Danielle Brooks had just coded it into existence. The moment the word suspended hit the air, the entire ballroom changed temperature. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was the realization. Everyone knew what a public suspension meant. Trust gone, investors gone, future gone. Phones lit up like a constellation of panic. Notifications pinged across the room. Brokers, partners, journalists. Pierce Brooks' deal halted mid-gala. Ethics breach confirmed live. 2.4B project frozen. Grant's face had gone pale. The kind of white that has nothing to do with color, and everything to do with loss. He turned toward his sister. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Charlotte's voice trembled. "I didn't think she'd actually—" "That's your problem," he snapped. "You never think anyone like her can." The line hit harder than he meant. Even he realized it too late. Across the room, someone gasped. Not because of what he said, but because of what it revealed. Danielle looked at him, eyes quiet, voice lower than the hum of the lights. "Exactly. You didn't think I could. ELNB #1. Soft surgical final." Naomi's phone buzzed. Her screen filled with headlines, comment feeds exploding. Clips from the live stream had already gone viral. Pierce Gala was trending #1 in less than 5 minutes. People weren't debating what happened, and they were demanding accountability. One comment flashed across her screen. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She just ended the deal. That's power. The crowd had shifted. No one was drinking anymore. The servers had quietly stepped aside, watching like witnesses in a courtroom they never expected to stand in. Every eye was drawn to Danielle, calm, centered, unbothered by the chaos she'd just unleashed. Carla messaged again through the earpiece. "Ma'am, PR suggests a holding statement." "No," Danielle said. "Let the silence speak first." Grant was pacing now, his voice breaking. "Danielle, this is bigger than pride. You just killed a future we both needed." "No," she said. "I just ended a culture you kept pretending wasn't there." ELNB #2. Each syllable landing like gavel strikes. Charlotte took a shaky step toward her. "Please." "I'll apologize. I'll fix this. I'll make a statement." Danielle turned to her slowly. "You can apologize to the cameras, but you can't unspill the wine." Charlotte's face collapsed under the weight of that truth. The laughter, the privilege, the certainty, all gone. Naomi whispered to another staffer, "She's rewriting what power looks like." The staffer nodded, and we're all watching it happen in real time. Grant stopped pacing. He looked at Danielle one more time, his voice low and tired. "You'll lose allies doing this." Danielle's tone didn't change. Then they weren't allies. They were liabilities. ELNB #3, the cleanest cut of all. Somewhere, a reporter whispered into her mic, "History may remember this night as the moment corporate ethics became visible." The chandeliers flickered as if reacting to the shift. Danielle adjusted her sleeve, the dried wine still faintly visible, a stain-turned symbol. She looked around the room not for applause but acknowledgement. "This isn't about humiliation," she said. "It's about restoration." And in that moment, the ballroom felt less like a party and more like a reckoning chamber, where a single act of arrogance had rewritten an empire, and a single woman had reminded everyone that silence can, in fact, be the loudest sound in the world. By the time the orchestra packed their instruments, the ballroom was no longer a ballroom. It was a battlefield of perception. Reporters whispered into mics, flashes cut through the dim light, and every whisper was evidence. At the far end of the hall, Grant Pierce's PR chief, red-faced and frantic, was already typing a statement into his phone. Too late. The internet had already written its own. Billionaire's sister humiliates black CEO at Gala. 2.4B, deal implodes in real time. Brooks Energy CEO redefines corporate power. Each headline hit harder than the one before. The fall was no longer private. It was streamed, time-stamped, and archived. Charlotte sat slumped at the edge of the table, her hand still clutching a napkin as if she could erase what the world had just seen. Grant stood beside her, motionless, caught between damage control and disbelief. Danielle didn't move. She stood beneath the chandelier's cold light, composed like marble carved from patience. Naomi approached quietly, holding out her tablet. "Ms. Brooks, the markets are reacting." Danielle glanced down. Brooks Energy, steady. Pierce Group, plummeting. She took a breath. Not satisfaction, not gloating, just confirmation. "Stability survives truth," she murmured. ELNB number 1. Simple, unbreakable. Charlotte finally found her voice. You think you've won? Danielle turned, eyes calm but unwavering. No. I think I've stopped pretending. Grant's tone cracked. You're destroying everything we built. No, Grant, she said. I'm exposing what you built on top of. He flinched. For the first time, the billionaire looked small. A man who had mistaken structure for substance. A young reporter raised her voice from the crowd. Ms. Brooks, do you have a statement for the public? Danielle turned toward the cameras, her posture unshakable, her tone even. Yes, accountability isn't an event. It's a culture. And tonight, that culture showed up dressed in silence and proof. The words landed across every microphone in the room. ELNB number 2, a line that would be quoted in headlines for months. Carla's message buzzed again through the earpiece. Ma'am, all press requests are routing to HQ. Do you want us to block or respond? Neither, Danielle said. We don't chase narratives. We define them. She looked at Charlotte one last time. Apologies won't fix this, Charlotte. Accountability might. Start there. Naomi lowered her tablet, her voice quiet but steady. Ma'am, the board just issued full backing of your decision. Danielle nodded once. No triumph. No shock, only inevitability. Good, then we move forward. Not away and forward. Grant exhaled sharply, his pride bleeding into exhaustion. You'll never work with my network again. Danielle smiled faintly. That's fine. I don't build networks. I build legacies. ELNB number 3. Mic drop level. Clean. Cinematic. Somewhere behind the crowd, a waiter whispered, she didn't just end a deal, she ended a dynasty. Danielle glanced around the room one final time. The chandeliers still burned bright, but the warmth was gone, replaced by the clarity that always follows a storm. Charlotte sat silent, her diamond bracelet catching the light like irony itself. And as the press continued to swarm, Danielle turned toward the exit, not fleeing, not retreating, but walking through the wreckage she never needed to survive. Outside, the night air hit her face, cool, clean, merciful. The city glowed ahead, restless and watching. She didn't look back, because justice had already turned around to look at her. Outside, the flashes followed her like weather, relentless, electric. The Gala doors closed behind her, sealing the chaos inside. Danielle Brooks stepped onto the marble steps as reporters swarmed, microphones rising like thorns. Ms. Brooks, was this planned? Are you ending the Pierce merger permanently? What message are you sending tonight? She paused at the top of the stairs, city lights glittering below like a galaxy made of noise. The air smelled of rain and change. Naomi caught up, slightly out of breath, holding a folded document, embossed, official, and gold-edged. Ma'am, the board sent final authorization. You're clear to disclose. Danielle took it, glanced once, then raised her eyes to the cameras. Her voice was calm, precise, the sound of a woman who didn't owe the world an explanation but was giving it one anyway. I wasn't here tonight as a guest. I was here as the majority shareholder of the Pierce Foundation's renewable division. 41% to be exact. Gasps rippled through the reporters like a current through metal. Some phones shook. Others froze mid-air. One journalist mouthed, "She owns it?" ELNB number 1, short, sharp, seismic. I built Brooks Energy from nothing. When I partnered with the Pierces, it wasn't charity. It was alignment. And when alignment turns to arrogance, the compass resets. The line hit screens before she even finished saying it. Hashtags erupted. She owns it. Brooks Power. We reset the compass. Naomi's phone buzzed nonstop, hundreds of mentions, live feeds looping the moment she lifted the gold document. Brooks Energy seal glimmering in the rain. Charlotte's image from inside the ballroom now flashed on the big outdoor screen above. Wine-stained hand, frozen smile, captured forever. The crowd outside murmured, the digital world merging with the real one. A reporter shouted over the noise, "So you're saying the Pierce family worked for you?" Danielle smiled faintly. "No, we worked together until they forgot what together meant." ELNB number 2, measured, devastating. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and distant like punctuation. Naomi looked at her boss and drenched in flashing light yet untouchable. "Ma'am, do you want to issue a formal statement to investors?" "Not tonight," Danielle said. "They'll read it in the morning and on the front page." She started walking down the steps. Each heel click echoed against the marble, steady, certain. Reporters shouted her name, but she didn't turn. Instead, she spoke once more, for every microphone that still dared to follow. What happened tonight wasn't revenge. It was accountability, performed live for a reason. Because sometimes the only way to prove power still has a conscience is to show it bleeding and still standing. ELNB number 3. Clean. Resonant. Timeless. The rain finally began to fall. Gentle at first, then steady, washing the last trace of red from her sleeve. Naomi lifted an umbrella, but Danielle shook her head. "Let it rain," she said softly. "Let it rinse what needed cleansing." Cameras caught that moment and the black CEO walking through rain, her reflection merging with the city lights. Power didn't need to roar anymore. It had already spoken and the world was still listening. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the storm had not. News vans lined the street outside the Pierce Foundation Tower like sentinels of scandal. The night before had become a global broadcast. Screens glowed across every financial network. Pierce-Brooks merger terminated live on air. Corporate reckoning, the night ethics won. Stock collapse follows public humiliation. Inside the tower, the boardroom lights burned through the gray morning haze. Grant Pierce stood at the head of the long table, his tie gone, his eyes hollow. Half the seats were empty and the others filled with executives checking their phones instead of looking at him. "We need a response," he said. Silence. Someone finally spoke. "There's no statement strong enough to undo a broadcast. The footage has 70 million views." Another voice, colder. "Our investors are freezing assets. Legal says Brooks Energy triggered every breach clause cleanly." Grant rubbed his temples. "She didn't even raise her voice," he muttered. A beat of silence followed, heavy as guilt. LNB number 1. That's what power sounds like when it's done pretending. Charlotte sat at the far end. Makeup faded, hair still smelling faintly of the wine she spilled. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of a napkin, white fabric turning to threads. "I'll apologize publicly," she said. "On camera, whatever it takes." A board member shook his head. "It's not about apology. It's about exposure. We're compromised from the inside out." Emails pinged, alerts flashing on screens. Government inquiry initiated. Ethics board demands formal audit. Pierce Group shares down 43%. Grant sank into his chair. The empire his family built in 3 generations had crumbled in less than 12 hours. Meanwhile, across the city and in the Brooks Energy headquarters, the mood was different. Quiet, controlled, focused. Danielle stood before a panoramic window overlooking the skyline. Carla entered holding a tablet. "Overnight sentiment reports, ma'am. 92% positive. Investors calling it the most dignified act of resistance they've seen." "It wasn't resistance," Danielle said softly. "It was restoration." ELNB number 2. Calm, healing, final. Naomi entered next, her voice lighter than the night before. "Ma'am, CNN and The Atlantic both want interviews." Danielle shook her head. "No interviews. Let the work speak. And the partnership? There will be others. The right kind this time." She turned toward the city again, her reflection in the glass framed by sunrise. In her eyes there wasn't triumph. There was balance. Carla looked at her quietly awed. "You really ended them in 7 minutes." Danielle smiled faintly. "No. They ended themselves the moment they forgot respect was a contract." 2. ELNB the 3. The echoing thesis of the entire story. Back at the Pierce Tower, Grant stared out at the same skyline but saw ruins instead of renewal. Phones still buzzed, shareholders still left voicemails, and Charlotte still sat in silence, unable to scrub her name from the headlines. Justice hadn't shouted. It had whispered, through dignity, through consequence, through a woman who never needed permission to belong. And in that whisper, the world heard something it hadn't in a long time. That silence, when powered by truth, is unstoppable. A week later, the city had already moved on, and at least that's what it looked like. But inside the business world, no one was moving at all. Every boardroom had replayed that clip. The pour, the silence, the reveal. Every leader was rethinking what power looked like when it refused to perform. Brooks Energy's headquarters glowed like order in a skyline of panic. Reporters still waited outside, but inside the mood was calm, productive, restored. Danielle Brooks stood in the main conference room, sleeves rolled up, her team seated around the glass table. Charts, numbers, projections, all in motion again. No wine stains, no headlines, just purpose. Our focus remains unchanged, she said evenly. We don't build for applause. We build for endurance, her staff nodded. Naomi took notes, eyes bright. Public trust index up another 12%, she added. Investors calling Brooks Energy the new standard of corporate ethics. Carla smiled faintly. And the Pierce board? Disbanding, Danielle replied. They'll restructure under new management. It's overdue. She turned to the window. The same skyline, now clear after the storm. Reputation isn't about being right, she said quietly. It's about being consistent when no one's clapping, ELNB nor one. Quiet, timeless, textbook leadership. Naomi hesitated before speaking. Ma'am, people keep asking how you stayed that calm, how you didn't lash out. Danielle looked at her, not like a boss, but like someone passing on an inheritance. Because fury burns fast. Dignity lasts longer. The room fell into a soft hush. Even the screen seemed to slow down as if absorbing it. Carla leaned in. And what happens now? Danielle smiled slightly. Now we mentor the next ones. The women, the outsiders, the ones still waiting in lobbies they already own. ELNB NAR 2, poetic, viral, and utterly human. The team exchanged glances. Not of pity, not of awe, but alignment. Something inside that room shifted, from survival to strategy, from storm to structure. Outside, the news cycle had begun to romanticize the story. The CEO who ended a $2.4 deal with a sentence. But inside Brooks Energy, the story was simpler. A line written on the wall in black ink, bold and spare. Power isn't what you hold. It's what you uphold. Naomi looked at it, smiling. Did you write that? No, Danielle said softly. Experience did. ELNB number 3, the philosophy distilled. The morning light poured through the windows, bathing the room in gold. Danielle adjusted her cufflinks. The same suit from the gala, cleaned, pressed, unchanged. The stain was gone, but the memory stayed. A scar turned scripture. Carla gathered the reports ready to move to the next phase. Board requests you open the next summit. We'll do it, Danielle replied. But not as a victory speech, as a blueprint. She looked around one last time before leaving the room. The world saw a collapse, she said. We saw a correction. As the doors closed behind her, the light shifted, filling the empty seats. And for the first time in days, the city outside seemed to mirror her calm. A skyline rebuilt not by noise, but by grace. The city had quieted down. No more reporters outside, no more flashlights chasing her shadow. Just the hum of late-night traffic and the soft pulse of life continuing, as it always does after the storm. Danielle Brooks sat in her office, lights dimmed, skyline glittering beyond the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, older, wiser, unshaken. The wine stain was gone, but the mark it left on the world was permanent. On her desk sat the old file folder from years ago, Pierce Brooks' initial agreement. She opened it slowly, like reading a memory she'd already outgrown. Her notes filled the margins, numbers, ethics clauses, handwritten reminders. Stay calm. Lead fair, she smiled faintly. You did stay calm, she whispered to herself. ELNB number 1. Self-recognition, not pride. The office clock ticked, one of those antique models her mother had given her before she passed. She could still hear her voice in memory. Baby, when they try to test your worth, don't argue. Just prove it. She looked up at the skyline again, her voice barely above a breath. You'd have loved to see this, Mama. The world finally learning that silence isn't weakness, it's precision. Outside, a light rain began to fall again, brushing the windows with quiet rhythm. It sounded like applause muted by grace. Naomi knocked softly and entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either, not after rewriting a chapter of history, Danielle said, smiling. They sat for a moment, mentor and mentee, power and witness, equals in calm. You changed how people see us, Naomi said. No, Danielle replied. We reminded them we were always here. ELNB number 2, the restoration line. Naomi hesitated. Do you ever regret ending the deal? Danielle shook her head. No. I regret how long I tolerated it before I did. That silence hung soft between them, not awkward but freeing. Naomi looked down at her own notepad, scribbling something quickly. Danielle noticed. What are you writing? A note to myself, Naomi said. For the day I'll need to remember this. And what's it say? It says, never let arrogance rent space in your dignity. Danielle smiled, proud, maternal, silent. She stood and looked out the window one more time. The city below shimmered, lights blinking like steady heartbeats. ELNB, there are 3. Her final thought of the night. Power borrowed from noise fades fast. Power earned from silence never leaves. Naomi followed her gaze, eyes wide. You think they'll ever forget what happened? No, Danielle said softly. And that's the point. The rain thickened outside, turning the city into a watercolor of reflection. Inside, the 2 women stood side by side. One legacy, one future, framed by glass, light, and consequence. The world had moved on, yes. But in this room, in this quiet hour, justice had taken root and was already growing into something bigger than power. Memory. Months passed. The headlines faded, but the lesson stayed. Universities began teaching the Pierce Gala as a case study in leadership ethics. Business schools called it the 7-minute revolution. And in offices across the country, a quiet standard had been set. One that didn't roar, didn't threaten, didn't crumble. It simply held. At Brooks Energy, a new plaque hung in the main hallway. Integrity is not reactive. It's foundational. Visitors stopped to read it. Employees walked by it like a promise. Danielle Brooks entered the atrium that morning, flanked by young executives, faces of every shade, every background. They weren't followers. They were successors. The future she had built now walked beside her, not behind her. Naomi stepped forward, tablet in hand. The next summit is ready, ma'am. And the press has called this one the new standard. Danielle smiled softly. Then let's make sure the standard isn't new, just finally visible. ELNB number 1. Legacy of visibility through integrity. They walked toward the stage. Rows of students, entrepreneurs, and CEOs filled the room, waiting for her to speak. The same chandeliers from the old gala, restored, repurposed, gleaming, now hung above her conference. History rewritten by context. Danielle stood behind the podium. No teleprompter, no script, only truth. What happened months ago wasn't a scandal, she began. It was a mirror. And when you look long enough into a mirror, you stop seeing others and start seeing your choices. The audience leaned in, silent, waiting. Power isn't a performance. It's the quiet ability to decide who you'll be when no one's watching, and to keep being that person when everyone finally is. The crowd erupted in applause, not wild, but grateful. They weren't cheering for a victory. They were witnessing a shift, ELNB number 2. Power isn't a performance. It rippled through the hall like scripture. After the speech, Naomi approached her backstage. Ma'am, a journalist asked if you'd call that night justice. Danielle thought for a moment, then smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need defense. No, she said. Justice is what the world saw. Legacy is what they remember after. ELNB number 3, the definition of her name and her mark. Outside the venue, students were already sharing her words online. The power is not a performance. Her legacy over noise. Danielle Brooks. The sunset poured gold over the building's glass facade, her reflection blending with a dozen others beside her. She wasn't the story anymore. She was the blueprint. As she stepped into her car, she glanced once more at the skyline, clean, steady, alive. Then she whispered almost to herself. The world didn't change that night. It just remembered how. The car door closed softly, and with it the sound of an era ending, not in thunder but in grace.